Hello and welcome to my dungeon. The Black Sword Hack is an awesome rules light old school sword and sorcery RPG, but the core rulebook is also very slim, so it is also light in rules explanation. So let's go through the rules together in detail, while I also add my own interpretation, explanation, rulings and examples, so that you get an in-depth understanding of how the system works. This first part of the series focuses on the general rules and on combat. If this interests you and you'd like to see more videos like it, consider leaving a like and a comment below and subscribing to my channel. Now, let's get into the rules.
The rulebook has wisely placed the general rules before the combat rules and before character creation, because you should really know the basic rules before you create a character, so you know in what frame the character needs to work, what you are creating the character for. The rules start with the explanation of turn. As they say, to make sure everyone at the table has a chance to speak. In each turn, a player gets a movement and an action. And the length of the turn depends on the circumstances. So a few seconds in combat, 15 minutes when exploring a dungeon-like locale, 6 hours when traveling, or a few hours when doing stuff in the city. And they give further explanation and examples for this in these highlighted boxes, which I really like about this book. So for this we have 2 examples. I want to do some shopping. Here they have their move, going to the shops, and their action, shopping. If the character just wants to resupply, they can go to several shops. If it's more involved, looking for specific and rare items or having something custom made, they can only do one stop, then go to the next player. Next example, I'd like to do some research. Here you have to ask the player to be a bit more specific. What kind of information do they seek and where? If they answer, I want to learn about the nearby ruins, so I'll ask around in taverns and make a trip to the local library, you'll have to say, well, spending times with drunks or studying books requires some time. That would be 2 actions, and you can only have one this turn. Tavern or library, what will it be? This whole process is so that you give each player their due time at the table. You'll usually do all of this without even thinking about it, just asking around the table what everyone wants to do and then guessing how long it takes. This is a bit more important when you play online, as it's easier to overlook players. As the rules say, this helps players prioritize what their character wants or needs to do. If you're playing online, this is a lifesaver, as it avoids players cutting each other off. As any rule in this game, see it as a guideline, very important. Players should still talk between themselves to come up with crazy plans. Think of turns as a metronome that only the GM can hear and help pace the session. How I run it at the table is that if the characters take action on their own in their single, for example this research or this shopping, I try to do this briefly and spend 15 minutes tops at one player before I move on to the next, better 5 minutes. But if the group is acting at a role and they can all talk to each other and all talk to the NPCs, then I give them as much time as they want to spend. Though sometimes I remind them that time is passing and I try to hurry them along so we don't spend 4 hours planning an infiltration, for example. Next up, the attribute tests. When a character wants to do something that has a chance of failure, the player makes an attribute test by rolling a d20. The attributes are described on page 20. We'll tell you which one of these depending on the situation. If you roll under the attribute, this means under or on your attribute value, then the character succeeds at the task. And if you roll over the attribute, the character fails or succeeds at a cost. What is succeeding at a cost? This is meant as a way to avoid the game stalling simply because of a failed roll. Here are a few examples tied to specific situations. Stealth. You manage to stay hidden but leave traces of your passage behind you. Study. You find the information you seek but attract unwanted attention. Or the information is incomplete and points to an unexpected direction. Climbing. You don't fall off the cliff, but you lose your sword, or another important item. Survival. You find water and food, but the quality is so bad you don't get the benefits of a long or short rest. You're not starving though. Influence. Your target interlocutor agrees with you, but asks for more money, more information, more time, whatever fits the situation. This is a concept that I learned playing Dungeon World, which is a Powered by the Apocalypse game. In Powered by the Apocalypse, the most common outcome of an attribute test is succeeding at a cost. You succeed, but something else happens. The way I run attribute tests in general. First, I only require tests if they are really necessary. If I'm not sure what the outcome is, and if there would be bad consequences to a failed roll. If there are no negative consequences, I don't require a roll at all because the character can just try as often as they like. And I really like the concept at succeeding at a cost because it keeps the game going. Imagine a common example: the characters are in front of a locked door and fail their lock-picking checks. That might grind the game to a halt because the group just can't go on into the next room. But if you run it like, you manage to open the lock, but your lockpick gets stuck in the lock as you do and breaks off, then there is a negative consequence for the failed rule that you've lost your lockpick and that the lock is now stuck, but they still manage to open the door and go on. Or if they're an infiltration, they could open the lock, but they're making a lot of noise, attracting a guard. Very important in stealth as well. When you're running a stealth infiltration, any stealth situation, usually don't want the whole thing to fail and a general alarm be raised and hundreds of guards rushing to the PC's location because of one failed roll. So instead saying you leave tracks or you attract the attention of one guard that comes checking, what do? You keep the stealth situation running without going into combat right away. And there are tons of negative consequences of costs that a situation could have. You could get a bit of damage, break some equipment, change the situation in some way. But if the roll is just so bad that you can't think how they could have succeeded even at the cost, they fail and they suffer the negative consequences of that failure. But those negative consequences should push the game forward. For example, again, the locked door, and they really fail their roll. They roll a natural 19, but you still want them to go through that door. So now what you could do is they try to open the lock, but they make so much noise they attract the attention from something on the other side, and a guard opens the door from the inside. Or some guards come from the outside to check out what is going on, and these guards are carrying keys for that door. Then the negative consequence would be combat, maybe even difficult combat, but after that the group can proceed through the door. Think of a failed roll by the players as an opportunity for you, the game master, to make a move to introduce some action that moves the story forward. Failure should never stop the narrative dead in its tracks. critical success or failure, no matter what the circumstances are. A roll of 1 is always a critical success, and a roll of 20 is always a critical failure. For attack rolls, a critical success means the character does maximum damage and adds another damage die on top. Whatever the roll, a critical failure means you have to roll your doom die immediately. So on an attribute test, natural 1 is outstanding success, but normally nothing special beyond that, unless you can think of something cool. Like you're scaling a wall very quickly, or you manage to sneak onto a guard so good you don't even have to roll for attack to take him out. Something like that. Natural 20 is a critical failure, so it's an automatic failure. Beyond that, it might have other consequences as stated in specific actions. For example, if you roll a natural 20 when blocking with the shield will break. But in any case, you have to roll on your doom die immediately, which in most situations is punishment enough for rolling a nat 20. But if it fits the narrative, if you've got something good on your mind, more negative consequences and failure can happen because of the 20. And this should actually say a roll of a natural 1 and a roll of a natural 20 for the next rule, threat level. When a roll affects an NPC or creature, intimidation, influence, combat, attack, defense, etc., and the NPC's or creature's level is higher than the character's, the player must add the level difference to the roll. The players don't get a bonus if they are of higher level, they just get a malus, a difficulty increase if the NPC's level is higher. But if you do this as written and do it onto the roll, for example, the difference is just 1, and you add that onto the roll, then you can no longer roll a 1. Because if you roll a 1, you have to add 1. So you have rolled a 2, so you cannot crit anymore. And your failure, your critical failure range, will have increased to a natural roll of 19 and 20. So I'd rule that this means a natural 1 or a natural 20. Otherwise, this rule will become too cumbersome and too punishing and be no longer fun. Group test. In a group effort, if half the characters succeed at the attribute test, the whole group does. This is useful when all characters try to be stealthy, dexterity test, or need to push forward while crossing a mountain pass, constitution test. In short, use this rule whenever the characters are doing the same thing and are able to help each other. Again, very important in stealth situations. One of my players once told me that skilling for stealth is completely irrelevant, because as soon as one character fails their stealth roll, you're in combat anyhow. So as a GM, don't run it like that. Don't require the whole group to succeed in a check. Someone will always fail. But the characters can usually help each other out in these circumstances. So requiring half of the group to succeed is a good compromise between making it too hard and making it too easy. Advantage and disadvantage. Having advantage or disadvantage on a roll means you roll 2 dice. On advantage, the player chooses which of the 2 rolls to use. On disadvantage, the GM chooses the result to use. Or you could say, on advantage, you use whatever die roll is better, and on disadvantage, you use whatever die roll is worse. For the GM, use this rule to reflect bad or good conditions that can influence an attribute test or a roll. This might be a strained relationships if they try to bribe a guard that dislikes them, or having the right tools for the job. So instead of modifying the role and the attribute test by giving a +2, +3, -2, -3, -5, you just give out advantage and disadvantage depending on the situation. And some advice for the players. The players try to create situations where your character can get advantage, find a better position, help another character, offer a bribe, use the right tools for the job, attack from stealth, do ambushes. Gaining some sort of advantage beyond the normally expected is how you maximize your chances of success. Advantage and disadvantage can apply to all die rolls. So for attribute tests, damage rolls, and usage die. We'll come to that. If a roll happens to have both advantage and disadvantage, they cancel each other out, no matter how many dice you have. This is just a simplification to keep the game running instead of counting beans. Or advantage and disadvantage dice in this case. Usage dice, short UD. Some things in the game are represented by a usage die to model the fact that they are available in limited quantities. In Black Swordhead, we like to use this mechanic to represent mostly abstract resources such as influence, depths, etc. The usage die should be seen as a push your luck mechanic. Can grant you some advantages, but it can also blow up in your face in the worst possible moment. Some games use this mechanic to manage concrete resources like rations or arrows. Not so on Black Swordhead. Counting 20 arrows is not rocket science, nor is recording the use of a week's worth of rations. Usage die should represent something important, not the content of one's backpack. So instead of concrete resources like arrows or rations, Black Swordhead uses these die to represent something that is more abstract and harder to count. How to use this? When this abstract resource is used, you roll the usage die. At a result 1 or 2 means that the die is downgraded to the next smallest die. D20 to D12 to D10 to D8, D6 to D4 to nothing. When you roll a 1 or 2 on a D4, the resource is depleted. And they give you the average number of rolls, which is 30 for D20, but just 2 for D4. And in example, to clarify what they mean, during the campaign the GM thinks that an NPC, a mercenary, owes a debt to one of the player characters who saved their life. The GM decides to represent this debt as a D6 usage die. This is an abstract resource after all. What does this mean? Each time the PCs ask the mercenary for help, they roll the debt UD. Once the die is depleted, the mercenary will consider their debt paid and will no longer help the characters for free. And this might be other things as well, like a unreliable mechanical contraption that will fail at some point, but you don't know when. Or the favor of the gods. Or the morale of the men you are commanding. We get some examples where the game is using this later on. Distances. Black Swordhead uses 4 distances: close, nearby, far away, and distant. Moving one range, so from close to nearby, from nearby to far, from far to distant. One range requires one move. Depending on the length of a turn, the actual distance covered by the character will vary. Here's an example for combat. Close is 1.5 meters or 5 feet, 1 square. Near is 10 meters or 6 squares, 30 feet. Far away is 20 meters or 12 squares, and distant anything beyond 20 meters. And outside of combat, this might be important for situations like chases. And what's interesting at this example is that this is not a hard rule. This is an example of ruling, something that you can come up with on the spot. Hadija the Swift pursues her target on the rooftops of the Jade City. The target is far away. meaning Hadidja has to cover 2 range bands to get close to her target, from far away to nearby, and then from nearby to close. The GM simply asks Hadidja's player to make dexterity tests. Once they get 2 successes, Hadidja catches up with the target, but if they get 2 failures first, the target runs away. But you could also rule a situation like this, just ask for 1 dexterity check, or change the distance 1 step after each dexterity check depending on the outcome. So in this case, if she succeeds, they go from far away to nearby. If she succeeds again, she goes from nearby to close, but if she fails, close to nearby, nearby to far, far to distance, and if you fail after distant, the target gets away. That's a bit more complicated. Also, if you didn't need to get close, if you could shoot an arrow at it from nearby, you would only need to succeed at 1 task to get from far away to nearby. But then you would need to succeed another dexterity test to hit with the arrow. This also plays into turns and time. How long does it take to travel? In combat, just a few seconds, but in this case, the GM wants the necropolis to be pretty big, so they go for a half-hour turn length. Their choice is based on the average walking speed of a human. So again, this is a ruling. If the group is exploring a pretty small place, 1 turn to move 1 distance might be a minute, 5 minutes, 15 minutes. But in a huge city, moving from 1 quarter to the next might take an hour, or even 3 hours. And in overland travel, it might take 6 hours to travel 1 hex of distance, 6 miles, 10 kilometers. On this in turns and distances. Using turns with distance will help you keep track of the passage of time. Even using an overland map, always make sure that the players know how long a journey can take. As a rule of thumb, characters travel at 5 kilometers, 3 miles per hour when walking. 55 kilometers, 35 miles per day on horseback, and 200 kilometers, 120 miles per day on a sailing ship. These numbers assume good travel conditions, roads or trails, winds, etc. and you divide them by 2 otherwise. Perception. When characters are actively looking for something, they find it. If the time taken to find it is a factor, ask for an intelligence test. Perception rolls are a pet peeve of mine. This is especially important in investigative adventure, something like Call of Cthulhu. You don't want the action to grind to a halt because the characters don't find the hint, the clue they need to go on with the story. So you don't want them to have to roll a perception check, and a hard perception check at that, to find the vitally important clue for your adventure. You want to just give it to them. So for example, the characters are searching through the office of a suspect, looking for incriminating evidence. Now, many GMs will run this like, yeah, you're in the office, and the characters say, I searched the office, and then they say, do a perception check plus 10. You don't find anything. Adventure grinds to a halt. Very bad. You might also run this as, you just give the evidence, the object they are searching for, if they search in the right place. But there are many places to look for, potentially in an office. Now, the characters might look through the desk, they might look under the drawers, they might look for a false floor in the drawers, they might look under the desk, they might look for false floorboards, and so on and so on. Now, it can be fun to figure out where this stuff is hidden, but it can also take a lot of time if you're going through all of the different possibilities. Loose floorboards, hidden in the wallpaper, hidden in a picture frame behind the picture, hidden in a safe behind a picture on the wall. The possibilities are endless. So this rule that the characters just find stuff when they are looking for it is very important to keep the action going. And if the time is a factor, ask for an intelligence text and then remember success at a cost. They might find the item, but it might take them a long time. Or they find the item, but just as they do, a guard walks into the room, or the suspect walks into the room. And if they fail the test outright very badly, the suspect walks into the room before they find the object, or at least they know they can continue the search later on, or they could ask the subject where it is. It's your move, it keeps the action going. And in general, I would keep perception checks to a minimum. If you're describing a scene, you should give the characters all of the information that is obvious. And then if they ask questions for further details, you still should give them all of the information that is obvious. Never ask a perception check for something that is obvious, only for stuff that is hidden, if at that. You want your players to have this information because they need this information to play and work with it and come up with solutions for the situations they're in. But another way to run this is if the characters are searching for something that might or might not be there. For example, they are searching through a room and they're looking for healing potions. Now, you didn't necessarily plan that there are healing potions in that room, but there could be. So let them roll a perception check, and on a success they find the healing potions, they are in luck, and on a failure there are no healing potions. It's like by asking for these specific items, the players are creating the chance for these items to be there. This is especially important if you have not planned out the contents of a room in details and you're making most of the adventure up as you go along. What the players are searching for and the die roll make up the reality of the adventure in this case. And you might also use that for clues and evidence. For example, if the characters are looking for tracks that monsters have left behind in the dungeons, or for this incriminating evidence, and you haven't planned for that stuff to be there beforehand, but it might be, then you could have them roll this intelligence test. But keep in mind, this should be stuff that is not vitally important to your adventure. It's like a bonus. It's a bonus finding that healing potions. It's a bonus finding those tracks and those clues. And there also might be consequences for a failed roll. The characters might be wasting a lot of time. The characters might make some noise and attract guards. Don't have the characters roll when there could be no negative consequences. Doom. Once they decide to go adventuring, the characters bring the attention of law and chaos on themselves. This is represented by the Doom die. Each time a character goes beyond their limits and tempts fate, they must roll their Doom die. The forces of law and chaos can and will turn the tide one way or another. There's a cool thematic mechanic, but it's easier to understand if you think about it like endurance and effort. So I'll explain this calling it effort, and you know it's Doom in this game. The effort die is a usage die. When it is depleted, the character is exhausted. In game term, the effort die is usually rolled when a character takes the same action twice during a combat turn. For example, making 2 attacks one after the other, or taking 2 movement actions one after the other. They are pushing themselves beyond their usual limits. They're putting effort in it. When they're using a gift that requires it. More on gifts in a later videos. This is a character advancement given by the gods. When they get a critical failure on an attribute test, the effort die returns to its maximum after the character has taken a long rest. Players can choose to put in some effort roll the effort die and subtract the result from an attribute test, making it easier. The effort die is automatically downgraded without rolling. If the effort die is depleted, you are exhausted. You can't use actions requiring you to put effort into it. Once the die is depleted, the character is considered exhausted. All the attribute tests and damage rolls are made with disadvantage until the characters can take a long rest. At least that's how I think about it. The game calls it the Doom die, which is very thematic for sword and sorcery. So instead of being exhausted, the character is doomed. And the Doom die is usually a D6. So this call on doom mechanic is a nice bonus. If you really want to succeed at an attribute test and you already have advantage or you can't get advantage, you can downgrade your doom die voluntarily to get that doom die as a bonus to make the task easier. Put in some effort if you really want to succeed at something. This doom die is also often used when casting magic, depending on the type of magic. More on that in a later video. And as you can see, it is one application of the usage die. An abstract resource that might fail you at any point. These are the forces of fate after all. Combat. Blood and souls for my lord Ariak. First and foremost, the players roll all the dice in combat. When monsters attack, the players simply roll to defend. In Black Sword Hack, you never have to roll any checks as a DM. Players roll for attack. Players roll for defense. Monsters do fixed damage. If an NPC sneaks up on a character, the character makes a check if they spot that NPC. And the level difference might increase the difficulty of that check. So combat starts with initiative. Every player makes a wisdom test. Those who succeed act before the opposition, monsters or enemy NPCs, starting with the player seated to the left of the GM. The rest act after the opposition, once again, in a clockwise fashion, as the sun goes. Just going round the table is the easiest initiative I can think of. It's fast, it's intuitive. If you are playing online, just go from the top of your player list to the bottom. Much easier to manage than any form of individual initiative. You might even skip this roll completely, just let the players act first. But having this check before or after the opposition, it's a nice compromise. On a critical success on the initiative roll, it means you get 3 actions instead of 2 on your first turn, which is a major advantage. On a critical failure on the initiative roll, you only get 1 action instead of 2 on your first turn, which is a major disadvantage. So there's definitely some stakes to this roll. What can you do in a turn? During that turn, your character can take 2 actions. Move, attack, use something, cast a spell, etc. pp. Whatever you can think of. Don't forget, you must roll your doom die if you take the same action twice, so 2 attacks, 2 movements, casting 2 spells. But you have the freedom to use your 2 actions to do whatever you want. Take 2 attacks, take 2 movements, do an attack and use a potion. Do an attack and cast a spell. And what I would encourage the players to do here is to use 1 action to create advantage on their next action, usually an attack. So move into a better position, try to flank the enemy, swing from a chandelier, jump onto a table. That way the combat gets a more actiony, cinematic feel, because the characters are not just slugging swords and spells at each other, but they're also constantly moving around and using the environment to their advantage. Attacking. Using a melee weapon. Make a strength test. Using a ranged weapon. Make a dex test. You don't have any special stats for this, no attack bonuses, nothing. This is a standard attribute test. Either strength or dexterity. On a successful attack, you deal damage. You roll your damage die. No bonus damage for high strength. You already do more damage because you hit more often. And on a critical success, you deal the maximum damage and add another damage die. Now, if you get a critical failure on an attack, you might want to add an extra negative effect on there, but it's usually not necessary because it already means that the character has to roll on the doom die. And that might get exhausted and leave them doomed, so it's usually not needed to add any more punishment, like breaking a weapon or stumbling or falling to the ground, to the already missed attack and roll on the doom die. Defending. Defending is done during the enemy's turn. It doesn't count against the 2 action limit you get during your own turn. In other games, defending is an action. So if you want to defend, you have to save your actions. And then you can only defend once. That might be realistic, but it's also pretty punishing. So being able to defend as often as you need to, against as many opponents as you might be facing, makes this game a lot more heroic as it otherwise would be. But this is befitting the sword and sorcery theme of the game. Certainly Conan the Barbarian could defend himself against 6 attackers, no problem. If you want to parry, you make a strength test. If you want to dodge, you make a dexterity test. Note, the character must be holding something to be able to parry, and ranged attacks can only be dodged. Unless you have a shield, more on that later. A failed defense roll means you take damage. A critical failure means your armor is ignored. So that is bad, but it's not as bad as getting a critical hit with potentially double damage in. Threat level. If an opponent's level is higher than the character's level, the player adds the difference between the 2 levels to the d20 when making any attribute test to attack. If the character's level's higher, no modifier is applied. Weapons and damage. Characters are trained fighters. The damage they cause with any weapon is the same, normally 1d6, which is not completely true. If you're wielding a 2-handed weapon like a greatsword, you roll the weapon damage with advantage, so roll 2d6 and take the higher one. But in general, you do 1d6 with weapon, and unarmed you do 1d4. Though you might get some abilities from your backgrounds or gifts or magic weapons that change this number. This means that you can choose your weapon depending on the style of your character rather than on the stats of the weapon. If you want your roguish character to fight with 2 short swords or 2 daggers instead of 2 long swords, you don't have to choose a specific weapon to be the most effective. You choose the weapon to be the most stylish. And while I like if weapons have some differences, because I'm kind of a weapon nerd, I can completely understand that in general they do more or less the same damage. If you run someone through with a dagger, you run them through just as much as you would do with a longsword or a spear or Zweihander. You can only run someone through so much. And especially in the context of sword and sorcery fiction, it is the man that's holding the weapon that is dangerous, not the weapon itself. What is the sword without the strength of your arm? Armor. The armor's protection rating is subtracted from the incoming damage, which can reduce the incoming damage to 0. So absorption armor, very easy to understand. Lowers the damage you get, unless you critical fail at the defense and the enemy gets around your armor, or the enemy has some special abilities that lets them ignore the armor. Shields. Shields are very important. Shields give you advantage to your defense tests when parrying. So you're foregoing the advantage you would have on damage checks for a two-handed weapon for an advantage on your defense test, which is very powerful. At the GM's discretion, they may let you use your strength to defend against arrows. Critical failure means the shield is broken. Two-handed weapons. These weapons give you advantage to the damage rolls. Now, this is not in the rules, but you might rule that if you're dual wielding weapons, if you're dual wielding two daggers, two short swords, you get advantage on your attack rolls. And on a critical failure, you lose one of your weapons. Mirroring the ability that a shield would give you. So you have more choice how you approach combat. Do you want advantage on your damage? Do you want advantage on your defense? Or do you want advantage on your attack? Attack effects. These are pretty cool. If you want to add an effect to your attack, say so before you make your attribute test, and then make doom roll. Put some effort into it. NPCs don't have access to these weapon effects. NPCs instead have their own special attacks. And this covers all the bases what you might do with weapon in hand. Break your opponent's weapon, or disarm your opponent, or make a brutal attack. Add the doom dice result to the damage you inflict. Tangle your opponent in his own clothes, grapple him, grab his weapon arm. You do no damage. All further attacks against the target during this turn are done with advantage. So this is good if all of your allies can still attack after you. Flurry. Inflict regular damage and immediately get an additional attack. And it states nowhere that the additional attack can't have an effect. So as long as you have a doom die to spend and put effort into it, you can make flurry after flurry after flurry, which might get you out of a sticky situation. At least that's how I would rule it. You might rule that the additional attack cannot have an attack effect, or at least cannot be a flurry. But even then, you have two actions in a round. Two regular attacks, but each of these regular attacks could be a flurry, bring your total attacks up to 4. So there are some interesting options here. Pin down. Inflict regular damage and your target cannot move this turn. Sacrifice. Inflict double damage. Triple if your attack is a critical hit, but your weapon breaks. This is only interesting if you've spent most of your doom dice, if it's no longer a d6, because if your doom die is still a d6, you could add the d6 and it would be about the same and you would still have your weapon. But if you really want to go for maximum damage in one attack, and if you have weapons to spare, this is a cool attack effect. Shove. You do no damage, but push your opponent to the ground, overboard, etc. So this might be useful in certain situations. Maybe there are spikes on the ground, and if you can push your opponent overboard of a ship, or over a cliff face, or off a wall, this might be very effective. Sweep. Damage everyone close to you, friend and foe. Very useful if you're surrounded by enemies. Vicious. Inflict regular and ongoing damage. So bleeding wound that will do damage every round until the usage die is depleted. More on that in ongoing damage. Things like acid, poison or fire deal ongoing damage, or bleeding and vicious effects. Roll for damage using a usage die, generally d4 or d6, each turn until the die is depleted. There should always be ways to stop the damage, like jump into water to douse the flames, or apply anti-venom urgent, or bind the wounds to stop the bleeding. So using your action instead of just taking the damage until either the usage die is depleted or you run out of hit points. It doesn't say when this ongoing damage is applied. So I would rule that you get it at the beginning of your turn, so that you at least suffer it once, so it doesn't do nothing. But then you immediately have the chance to do something to stop the damage. Hit points. When a monster or NPC's hit points reach 0, they are dead. Unless you still want to use the NPC and have a good excuse why he will not be dead at 0. But you usually don't do any death saves with NPC, you don't bother. At 0 hit points, a character is helpless, unable to do anything except talk feebly. Once the fight is over, or the character is dragged to a safe place, the player rolls d6. On 1, he is just scratch. Character is good to go except for a new scar. On a 2, missed. One random piece of equipment is destroyed. 3, impaired. Disadvantage on dexterity tests for the rest of the session. 4, injured. Disadvantage on all attribute tests for the rest of the session. 5, butchered. Lose 1 point of roll a d6, strength or dexterity permanently. 6, killed. Create a new character. So this is a fairly generous death system. You don't have to roll death rolls every time, and you also don't die right out. Even if you're reduced to 0 hit points, you only have a 1 in 6 chance that your character is killed right away. But there will usually be some kind of consequence unless you get lucky and get the scratch results. But there's also not really a way to get the characters back into the action right away. There's no healing magic to get another character's hit points back up, no potions, and certainly no healing word you can do as a bonus action from a distance. Now, if a character goes to the ground, he is out of the fight. And depending on the situation and how evil you are as the GM, the character, the helpless character on the ground might still be threatened by whatever they are fighting against. So the other characters might have to drag him out of the fight before they can continue the fight, or stand over him so the monsters don't start eating him while he is on the ground. You could certainly do something like that if you wanted to up the tension and create a more dangerous and more dramatic situation. But for general combat, this helpless system strikes a nice balance between heroic adventuring and tense deadly combat. Recovery. As soon as they opted for a life of violence, characters have shown an unnatural capacity to heal. It is said that the powers of law and chaos tend to favor those who fit into their plans. Anyone witnessing the PC's unnatural healing grows suspicious of them. People associate with the powers that be usual bring bad luck and death with them. In game terms, it simply means the player characters recover HP by taking a short rest or long rest. Everyone else needs medical attention and several weeks of bed rest. So the rules are quite aware that it is unrealistic and supernatural how fast the characters heal, but they can give reasons within the fiction of the world why this is the case, and it also might have some negative consequences if people are aware of this supernatural healing and grow suspicious of the characters. So, short rest can be taken anywhere. They last 1 hour. Characters recover a number of hit points equal to half their con score, round down. A character can take 1 short rest per day. So they can be taken anywhere, but probably need 1 hour where you can rest. Take a drink of water, rest by a fireplace, bind up your wounds. You can't take a short rest while you're walking around or while you're still exploring rooms in the dungeon. Long rest can only be taken in safe environments, like in a city tavern, or at least a fortified campsite. They last 6 hours and characters recover all their hit points. The Doom die are fully restored as well. Some backgrounds and gifts, more on that in a later video, may require a long rest to refresh. This is mentioned in their descriptions. What counts as a safe environment is up to the GM. It is usually a settlement of some kind, with some degree of provided comfort. A campsite in the wilderness where night attacks interruptions are a possibility is never a safe environment. You shouldn't expect to have long rests while out in the wild. So this is a pretty fast and generous recovery system. Even while out in the wild, you can still take short rests and you will recover a good amount of hit points. But if you want all of your hit point and resources back, you have to seek out a safe environment. At least a fortified house or something, where you can safely rest for 6 hours without fear of interruption. The combat chapter ends with an example combat. Arkham, I must be doomed, 19. This part of this combat example confuses me to no end. I think it's just plain wrong. Honestly, this example of combat is pretty bad. I guess there's only so much you can do within a single page. So I made my own combat example. You come into the clearing. You spot 4 cultists that were readying a bound woman for ritual sacrifice. You have not been sneaking, so they spot you immediately and draw nasty looking swords. Roll wisdom for initiative. 4, a success. I must be doomed. Natural 20. That's a crit failure. You only get 1 action in your first round of combat. You also have to roll your doom die. 1. Damn it. That downgrades it to a D4. Better luck next time. Arkham, it's your turn. The cultists are about 10 meters from you. That's nearby distance. What do? I use my first action to ready my bow. Then I shoot the cultist closest to the woman. They are level 2, so add 1 to your attack roll. 7. Hit! I roll damage with my longbow with advantage. And that's a 6. Awesome, that kills him. How do you want to do this? I shoot him in the face. Alright, the first cultist goes down with an arrow to the face. The other 3 rush you. 1 goes to you, Arkham. The other 2 rush Morgeld. They stab and swipe their swords at you. Roll to defend. You once, you twice. 17, that's a hit. You take 3 damage. You can reduce it by your armor. So that's 2 left. Still good. I've got advantage because of my shield. That's 16 and a 2. Success. Another natural 20. Another natural 20. Damn the gods of chaos! Damn, that's some terrible luck. Your shield breaks under the onslaught of blows. You take a nasty step to the armpit where your armor does not protect you. You take 3 damage ignoring armor. Also, roll your doom. 3. That was close. Okay, it's your turn now, Morgeld. 2 cultists are right in front of you. Can I do a swiping attack to hit all 3 of them? I think that is fair. Arkham and Morgeld had been standing next to each other when the combat started after all. You can, but you would hit Arkham as well. Alright. I'll do a flurry instead. Roll my doom, that's a 4, and my attack. Natural 1, baby! I decapitate that scumbag. That's karma. Nice. Do full damage and add another die. So, 6 plus another 5, that's 11 damage. That's more than enough to kill him. His head goes flying, and the body collapses in a fountain of blood. Nice. For my second attack, 12, that's a hit, and 3 damage. You wound the cultist, but he is still standing. New round of combat. Arkham, it's your turn again. I shoot the guy in front of me with my bow. Twice. Alright, roll your doom and your attack. 5 for the Doom, that's fine. 6. And 6 on the attack for 5 damage. That just puts him on the ground. For my second attack, makes no sense to shoot him again. Can I instead try to shoot through the bindings of the sacrifice to free her? Huh. You know what? Why not? Give me a roll. 7, that hits. Your shot cuts through the ropes holding the woman. She scurries behind the rock she'd been bound to for cover. The last cultist tries to stab you again. Morgold, roll defense. 6. Success! My turn. Can I move in a flanking position to get advantage on the guy? Akem's only holding a bow, so I'd say no. But the woman she just freed throws a rock into the cultist's back, distracting him. Roll with advantage. Nice. That's 2 and 5 damage. He was already wounded, so he's now seriously hurt. The last cultist throws down his weapon and begs for mercy. What do you want to do? Let's bind him and question him. Good idea. He might tell us where the rest of the cultists. And the next take a short rest. We have taken some damage. The cultist tells you of their mountain fortress, and that they are getting ready for a big ritual that will happen tonight. The woman you freed also tells you that many women and children from her village have also been abducted by the cult, and pleads with you to save them. I don't think we have time for a short rest. Alright. I've got some healing balms in my backpack. Let's push on. This ends our example combat and also this first look into the rules of the Black Sword hack. If you got any questions on the rules I just explained left, feel free to discuss the rules in the comments below. For now, I wish thee safe travels, dreamers, until we shall meet again.